to this debate happening today. So on our next slide, just a reminder to everyone, we want to welcome you all here, and we try to keep our format as open as possible. So we're reminding you, please, that when you are not speaking or not on video, please remember to stay on mute unless you're called upon. Also, remember to put your view on speaker view instead of galleries. That way you can benefit from all of the things that are there. We want you also to remember to join in with us. Join in on the through the chat box with any thoughts that you have, questions that you might have, ideas that you might want to share with us. And then lastly, when the poll comes up, poll questions or otherwise, be vigilant. Jump in there, go with the polls, but also if you don't feel comfortable in the polls, answer in the chat box. Because we love those responses and they really do give us a lot of positive material moving forward. Next slide. And this is another feature, a new feature with the Crisis Jam, as a reminder to those that require the ASL to remind you that it is not automatically coming up on your screen. So you do have to go to the bottom of the screen to interpretation and click on it so that that will make it more personal. Those instructions are in the chat box for your usage going forward. Next slide. This is a reminder again that we've had over 500. We are rapidly approaching 600 unique speakers since its inception of the Crisis Jam in 2020. And we are looking forward again to anyone who would like to become part of this long expanding list of wonderful speakers we've had so far. Please don't hesitate to contact us. Give us ideas on speakers that you might think, if it's not yourself, just someone else that you might think would be a great speaker to be used in the Crisis Jam. We'll look forward to hearing from you. I also want to talk again about talk.crisisnow.com to just remind you of not only its existence, but also the myriad and plethora of informational things that are available within that site. You can look at it now live streaming, which is wonderful. You're also able to register. If you haven't already done so, you can go in and you can register. And that way you have all this material available to you. You can see previous Jam episodes, and you can look ahead at some of the things that are coming out moving forward. And again, if there's any questions, go into the chat box. You can see some of the links that would be helpful. Also about the YouTubes, you can go into the YouTubes and you can see many of our episodes. And with the topic areas that are coming up now, just reminders about a lot of those and Moving America's Soul on suicide. Just go in and check those out if you haven't had the opportunity to do so. So wonderful. And again, I highlight about the Crisis Jam debates. I'm so thrilled about this because it's giving an opportunity again to talk about top-notch 988 topic areas in crisis services that are helpful, I think, across the board to have different perspectives on. So in these crisis debates, we can take a look at some of the ones that will be coming up. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see that the first one that's coming up next is the one that is today. And that is going to feature Wesolowski and Tom Betlach that are going to be talking about whether or not all states should enact legislation that includes a 988 fee. So we're excited about that and looking forward to that going forward. Now, before we get there, though, we're going to do a pre-debate survey. And on that same question, all states should enact legislation that includes a 988 fee, we'd like for you to drop your response into the poll, please. And that would be very helpful for us. So you can go ahead and put in your vote and press submit. And we'll give it a little bit. Wonderful. Okay. As we move on, let's take a look at some of the, and we'll talk about the pre and post survey because we know that that data will be presented to you later on, but we're going to let it run in the background for a little bit as we move on. But coming up on June 18th is the next debate, debate number 8, on whether crisis facilities should require parents to stay during a crisis episode. We have someone who is speaking on the positive in Gwenda Summers, but we don't yet have an individual that is going to be speaking on alternatives or the negative. So we invite you again, if you know of someone that you think might be a good fit for that particular debate, drop it in the chat box. Let us know, because that would be very helpful to all of us in terms of keeping these debates lively and keeping them moving forward. Next one is debate number 9 that is coming around July 16th. And that one, there's going to be talk of coordinating follow-up care and crisis services, whether they require high-tech software solutions. And we don't yet have speakers for either side. And again, this is giving out to you to be a part of this decision. Help us to find some individuals that might be great for that. What I'm hearing is that possibly David Covington might be on one of these. So we'll see how that works out. Okay. And next is a reminder about our live and on location segments. We have one that is coming up on June the 4th. And that one is going to be talking about crisis services and crisis beds, and we'll be addressing a lot of issues that you see there. And we've had one before, if you remember, in Utah, and it was absolutely fantastic. So on the upcoming on June 4th, it's highlighting the Columbus facility in Franklin County. And this is an amazing facility under construction. And what we've been told is that once completed, it's going to be 72,000 square feet. And it's going to be full of all of the connections necessary, the bed space, the chair space, all of that will be available. And it's a reminder again that this is coming up on June the 4th for all of us to be able to go with. And in that, during that time, we're going to be featuring a number of wonderful speakers, Erica Clark-Jones, as you see here, but also Joy Brunson, and as well, Jonathan Thomas will all be a part of the live streaming for this particular live on location. And again, this is going to be at the Franklin County Crisis Care Center in Columbus, Ohio. All righty. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the news that has been coming up of late. And we'll invite you all to take a look at these particular articles as we drop the links into the chat box. And the first one comes from the New York Times that talks about why do more police officers die by suicide than in the line of duty. And we're going to drop again the link in there because we can see that there's potentially a number of reasons why this is occurring, either through PTSD or other measures of trauma. We want to make sure that that is explored. Following this is another article from The Guardian. And The Guardian is a publication that comes out of England. And they're talking about people in mental health crisis having to wait up to 3 days in the emergency areas that they have in England. And it sounds somewhat familiar with what we are encountering. So again, it's an interesting article that we'll refer you to in the chat box as well. And next, now this is a wonderful announcement, folks. This particular announcement, the Huntsman Family Foundation and the Huntsman Health Foundation are sponsoring a huge event starting tomorrow, which is a briefing on Capitol Hill. And this is, as I said, occurring tomorrow. And it's going to be on public safety, public health, and public hope from 11 to 1 in the Dirksen Senate building. I've been told that there are still some seats available if you are interested in going. From what I do understand, it is not going to be virtual. So if you are interested, please don't hesitate to give Karen, our own Karen Jones, a connection if you would like to see if there are any seats available. And you can email her, and her email has been placed in the chat box. We want to also point out that during this time, a relevant issue, Dr. Arthur Kleinschmidt, the new HHS Behavioral Health Director, is also going to be the opening speaker. So we're looking forward to any of you that can make it there to be there tomorrow. And next slide. Now, if we could we go back to the previous slide? Because in this slide, what you see is our friend Chuck standing there, but there's a gentleman behind him that's pointing straight up. So I wanted to go to the next slide and just show you what he was looking at. So just an interesting caveat there. Just wanted you to see that. Okay. On the next one, we have a short video that's going to talk on 988 being cited, in this particular in Ohio. All righty. And for as brief as it is, I just wanted to point out that we love getting those kind of sightings. So please feel free to send those in. Let us take a look at them, and hopefully we can focus on them being in our particular crisis jam. So we're going to move quickly to the crisis jam showdown. We're not calling this the trivia hot seat this time. We're calling it the showdown. And in the showdown, quick question for the audience. Too many programs operate under conflicting rules, making it hard for families to get the care they urgently need. Skilled professionals are frustrated by fragmentation, while millions are wasted in a broken system that failed to deliver proven treatments. We're asking the question, who said it? Was it A, Rosalind Carter, B, Michael Hogan, C, Patrick Kennedy, or D, Vivek Murthy? And if you will place your answers into the poll, we'll quickly check it out. Wait for the polls to come up. We remember that Vivek Murthy, Dr. Vivek Murthy was our U.S. Surgeon General, and everyone knows Rosalind Carter. So let's see how this is. So the polls are kind of split there, but it looks like the most are either going with Rosalind Carter or Patrick Kennedy. So let's see what the real answer is on this one. And the answer is Michael Hogan. And we have the pleasure of having Dr. Hogan on the line. And Dr. Hogan, if you are here, would you please unmute? Because I wanted to check with you on just a note or two, if you would. Do we have you here, sir? Okay. Well, what I wanted to do was just go through with Dr. Hogan. There he is. There he is.
He is here. You just couldn't hear him speak.
Okay. Good morning to you, sir. Okay. I don't quite hear a response still.
Are you hearing me?
I hear you now, sir.
Okay, sorry about that.
Thank you so much. No problem whatsoever. I wanted to just question you on this because when we did a little preview on it, there were a number of people that when they saw this question, they instantly went to your name and they said it had to be you. So real quick question. Do you think this is still going on?
Oh, no doubt about it, Brian. The quote actually comes from my transmittal of the interim report of the President's New Freedom Commission to the president, and the focus was to try to gin up attention to the problems in the mental health system, and the issue of fragmentation has not gotten better in my view. It's probably gotten worse, and I don't know what I attribute that to. Mental health is still not part of overall health. Financing is still divided between Medicaid and states and other payers, and as we increase our efforts to add coverage in parts here and there, we don't somehow seem to be able to make them align at the same time. And to some extent, crisis is caught in that as a newcomer, if you will, even though it's an old service, it's a newcomer in the system in many places. So fragmentation is still a big problem.
Wow. Well, thank you for that, Dr. Hogan. And we're looking so forward to your comments a little later after the debate. But one very quick question for you. Someone created an AI image of what they thought you might have looked like back in 2002. I just wanted to get your comments on what you thought about that picture.
Well, not bad. I would have to say I think I had already started to go gray 20 years ago, so that might be uh, a little change, but you know the mustache was still there.
All righty. Well, again, thank you. And we look forward to talking to you in just a little bit.
Thanks, Brian.
All righty. And if we go with the next slide, please. We are now ready to get into today's debate. Should all states should enact legislation that includes a 988 fee? I have the pleasure of introducing a dear friend and colleague, Laura Evans, who's going to be the moderator for this program. She's with Public Policy and Government Affairs with Vibrant Emotional Health. So, Laura, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Sims. The honor is all mine. It's always good to get to see you and be on the jam. And I am super excited for this debate. Should all states enact legislation that includes a 988 fee? One of the things that I think is super interesting about this debate is that we're not necessarily having the conversation of whether or not sustainable funding is needed, if money should be flowing. So that is great. It is just, hey, should it be through a fee or other mechanisms? So for today's debate, we have Hannah Wesolowski, who is the Chief Advocacy Officer with NAMI. And then on the negative, we have Tom Betlach, who is a partner with Spear Healthcare Strategies. And so we are going to start the debate. I am going to turn it over first to Hannah to give 5-minute opening statement. So Hannah, take it away.
Well, thank you, Laura, and thank you to the hosts of this call for allowing me to talk about this important topic. 988 is a lifeline. It's not just part of the name, and a full crisis continuum of care is essential to help everyone get help and hope. A 988 fee, in my opinion, is a tremendous tool to give us the resources to do that. So my first point is that 988 fee is the most sustainable and reliable funding stream for 988. 988 is an emergency life-saving service, and it deserves the most sustainable funding possible, and we can't risk future funding cuts. We need guaranteed funding today and into the future. A fee structure has a lot of advantages. It's predictable. 988 system administrators can easily predict how much money they'll have several years into the future so they can plan system improvements and do better long-term planning. It's stable. It's not dependent on the state having a good economic outlook, and it's not as variable as appropriations or private donations or grants, which can always change. It's available year after year. Once it's enacted, state legislators don't have to go back and do any additional action. And importantly, it is funding that belongs entirely to the state. Fees are flexible. That gives states the ability to tailor their spending to whatever needs they have in their full crisis continuum. You know, at NAMI, we know that finding new money for mental health services is difficult, and we can't waste the opportunity to get more resources. Fees give us new funding for a system that desperately needs it. So far, we have 11 states with fees, and they collectively bring in over $220 million each year for the 988 system that otherwise wouldn't exist. I'm going to repeat that, $220 million. That's a lot of money. That brings me to my next point. States with a fee are less reliant on the current political environment. So state governments must balance their budgets. And history tells us, we've seen this at NAMI, that time after time, mental health programs are often the first thing on the chopping block when state lawmakers need to make tough decisions on funding cuts. 988 fees give us stability, whether we're in a good economy or a bad economy. And when the economy gets worse, we know mental health needs grow. Recession-related financial hardships like losing a job or losing a home lead to greater rates of depression, anxiety, substance use, and even suicide. So what's going to happen when we experience the next recession? Just as people are experiencing more mental distress and reaching out to 988 in greater numbers, states could have less revenue to support 988, particularly if they don't have a reliable funding stream from a fee. Furthermore, states are facing a very uncertain environment due to what's happening at the federal level. Medicaid is being debated today, literally today, in the House Energy and Commerce Committee, and we could see hundreds of billions of dollars in cuts in the next decade, meaning states have a huge gap to fill. We are also seeing grants related to behavioral health being rescinded or proposed eliminations. States are going to have to figure out any funding gaps from Medicaid changes or federal funding changes. And that puts state budgets at risk. It's too much of a risk. Funding can dry up, and we don't want 988 to have to compete with other critical behavioral health programs for that precious limited funding. Finally, my last point, 988 fees are about parity. People experiencing a mental health crisis deserve a quick and appropriate response, just like anyone experiencing a physical health emergency. Behavioral health services have never been equal to physical services for physical health conditions, and we have work to do to catch up, but only if the funding catches up too. 911 fees have been a critical part to growing our emergency response system. So if you have a heart attack, if you have a stroke, you have another physical health emergency, you can receive the response you need in the shortest amount of time possible. And it's well past time that we had that for mental health emergencies. Mental health is just as important as physical health, and 988 should have the same reliable funding structure that 911 has. The country's highest fee amounts to $7.20 total cost per phone line over 12 months. Is saving a life worth $7? The American public certainly thinks so. About 70% of Americans agree in NAMI's last polling that fees work and they're happy paying them. People are willing to pay to know these services will be there if and when they or a loved one need them. Why would we leave money on the table and risk that not being true? Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. You make a strong argument, but I know that Tom has a good rebuttal. So Tom, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today. Hannah, that was amazing. Thanks so much. It's a tough act to follow. And so I'll get right into it. First, I was described as being the negative. I would like to say I'm the alternative to the question. So a negative is so negative, I'm going to go with alternative. So as I was ruminating on this question, to me, it's a multi-pronged question in terms of should we have a tax to support 988 and crisis system? That's really the how of what you would do something. But I feel that our question needs to focus in terms of not just the how, but what is it that we're trying to accomplish? We are trying to accomplish the development of a sustainable, viable, well-funded crisis system, whether it's in your state, your local community, nationally, right? So that the tax is just the how. We have to look at what's the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to have sustainable, viable crisis systems. And to do that, there's not just one answer that can be done to advance that. There's a multitude of ways that can advance a viable, sustainable crisis system. And so let's look at what some of those options are. And Hannah touched on some of these. But the first is braided funding. We see examples of this. It's combining local funds, state funds, Medicaid dollars, federal grants. It's putting it all together to develop a comprehensive system that really creates funding streams that can grow with that system over time. Because the system that we have today is hopefully not the system we have next year, and hopefully not the system we have 10 years from now. And so the streams that we identify have to be able to grow and evolve with those systems. And the braided funding stream looks at ways to do that. The value of the braided funding stream is that you're leveraging federal funds in terms of advancing a stable crisis system. You're bringing in potentially commercial carriers and addressing the parity issue that Hannah described in this real problem in terms of crisis service funding today for all of our states. And we got examples of how braided funding can work. So we look to states like Arizona that spend over $250 million. And while it's great that 11 states have advanced new taxes to the tune of $220 million, Arizona offers an example in which their system alone is well above that dollar amount. The second option is to appropriate general funds. And so when you look at examples of this, we have the state of Utah. And so there are the ability to go ahead and advance programs. This is what state government does often. The vast majority of state services are funded through general appropriations, not through specific fees, not through specific funding sources. But when you look at the totality of what states fund, it is often through general appropriations. And so highlighting the need for crisis systems, highlighting that as a priority, is something that policymakers should be considering as part of their overall decision-making of how to allocate resources. The third option is to leave it up to local governments. And that's not for most states, but there are some states out there in which they have said local governments are still the main entry point for the delivery of behavioral health services. They're the main financing stream. They've been used to leverage Medicaid and a variety of other sources. And so the approach that should be taken should be reflective of each of the unique states that we have. States are often viewed as laboratories for democracy, and the approaches that we have around financing should reflect the laboratories that we have in each of our different states. So the last one, the value is really recognizing the fact that for some states, local government is closest to the delivery of services and closest to the people that are being served and should be the solution. So in addition to having multiple options to pursue, I think it's important to recognize the limitations of a new tax in many states. The first is just the political challenge for states, especially those states with supermajority requirements, in which there's a requirement of 2/3, or in some states even higher, in terms of an overall vote in order to be able to advance a tax. And so you oftentimes see good causes not being able to advance just because of the label. This gets back to the how versus the what. The how of a new tax often becomes a way in which it's not politically feasible, and then that results in the what not being able to be advanced within that state of a strong, stable, sustainable crisis system. The second downside of a new tax is that you can take individuals that may be your proponents, that may be your supporters, and because you're trying to advance this through a new tax, they have now become opponents because they have generally taken a policy position where they are not going to support new taxes. And so by limiting them to the only way to support advancing crisis in our state is a new tax, you have taken away the ability of some individuals that may be very critical as policymakers and limited their ability to support advancing crisis systems in your state. The third area is that new taxes may be insufficient to advance that overall goal of a sustainable broad crisis system. We know that in 911, 911 is limited to just funding a portion of the 911 response system. Fire services are funded often through general local taxes. Hospitals are funded through a completely different funding stream. So let's not pretend that the 988 tax would be parallel or comparable to 911, because that does not fund a system. It funds call response. And so we need to look at ways to approach an overall viable system. The fifth reason in terms of the limitations around new tax is oftentimes new taxes involve compromise. So you may feel you want 70 cents. Well, in order to get the votes that you need, you may settle for 30 cents. As a result of that, you have now settled for a financing stream that is far below the overall level of resources that you need. But through political compromises, you've ended up with something that is insufficient. And the challenge is, once policymakers have enacted a tax, they feel like they've solved the problem. So going back and recognizing the fact that you may need additional resources, you've now lost the political capital to go to those policymakers and ask for additional resources, whether it's through a new tax or other funding streams as well. And then finally, the last area of limitations around a new tax is that dedicated funding streams often go and sit in very siloed organizations. They're not looked at systemically. People have turf issues over really protecting those funds. They view themselves as having fiduciary responsibility. And we see this all the time. And it was highlighted in our quote today that we have all these different silos that exist in state government. And that results in a non-systemic approach of how to deal with that. So, those are a number of limitations that exist, and recognizing the fact that there's a lot of alternatives out there to just having a new tax to measure our overall goal of having a comprehensive, viable, sustainable crisis system that is going to grow over time to meet the needs of the population.
Well, Tom, that is quite the alternate framing. Thank you. I think you both brought strong arguments here. We've got some good questions in the chat. I'm going to try to get those questions in before we have to move to the roundtable. The first question came in around low populated rural states. So for states that don't have massive amount of population or phone lines, how could a fee impact either disproportionate increase per phone line or call for a few people, or for people who may not be able to afford having an additional fee? So let me just put that question out there for the both of you, whoever wants to take it.
I'm happy to jump in. I think that's two parts to that. States can tailor their 988 fees, and we've seen them doing that. So lower income residents don't have to pay the fee. Both Maryland and California exempt residents participating in the FCC's federal Lifeline program for low income consumers, I believe I got that name right, from paying that 988 fee. Additionally, if somebody has a prepaid cell phone, prepaid fees are set at a different level and are generally much lower. So states aren't preempted from, making exceptions based on need or income. States have the flexibility to do that. And I would note that the question was, should there be a 988 fee? Not, is that the only way that we should fund 988 and related crisis services? And so I think when you look at some of our more rural areas, we see Vermont, for example, it's a state with a low population, but they have a fee. That can be one tool in your toolbox to continue. I completely agree that braided funding is important. I think a fee is one part of that braided funding stream, and I think every state should be utilizing that opportunity.
I guess my answer would be similar to what I said in my earlier comments, which is really, it's a state by state decision in terms of what they should have as their best funding streams to support a viable, sustainable, strong concrete crisis system. And so, if a state like Wyoming or other rural states don't see the value in this, then they should look at alternative funding streams that were identified. The other thing that was interesting was, like, you didn't even need to listen to our discussion around this and Hannah's great points. You could go to ChatGPT and type in this same question, and one of the answers that comes up is, a 988 fee would be a regressive tax. And that's an example of it in terms of its imposition on rural areas that may not have the same resources as urban areas. And yes, there are ways to give credits, but we see all the time in a variety of different tax structures that oftentimes those credits go unclaimed. So all you have to do is look at, like, the earned income tax credit and know that people don't necessarily know when they can get credits for the different taxes that they pay.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you for that, Tom. I'm going to go to you now with a question that from myself that I heard as I was listening to both presentations. Your alternatives mention a lot of the items that Hannah pointed out are subject to political instability. What would be your rebuttal to that argument?
Yeah, so there is often, whenever you're dealing with financing, you're dealing with political questions around this. And even a 988 fee goes and sits in a fund. And having been a budget director for many years, I am guilty of this as well. There's nothing that protects those funds in a downtime. We raided hundreds of millions of dollars from funds that were protected for certain purposes. So when times get difficult enough, there is no such thing as a dedicated funding stream. So we shouldn't pretend that 988 is a protected funding stream, because it's just as easy for policymakers to go in and raid that as it is to cut other funding streams.
Okay, well, thank you, Tom. Hannah, do you have anything rebuttal to that before I move to the next question?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, as an advocacy organization, when you have appropriations, advocates have to go up there every, every year or every 2 years, depending on the budget cycle, to make sure that that funding is protected. And that's hard because you're often asking people to share their personal stories and relive what is often one of the most difficult days of their lives. And that takes a lot of resources. And I think if there is a way to have funding that you can protect and how that funding is used has to be reported to the FCC and reports on fee diversion. I think it's really important to try to avoid those costly fights that aren't always successful. We see that all too often, that people lose those battles because it's a tough funding environment. So let's have something that we know is set aside, that we can use for the purposes that we need them for.
So Laura, I have to counterpoint this. I went and appeared before over 17 years, the appropriation committees in the Arizona House and Senate. And never once, well, no, I take that back. Once I had to talk about crisis in the midst of the Great Recession. And we had a state-only piece of funding and the legislature kept it in. But other than that, over the course of 17 years, we never once talked about crisis funding and how we braided and created a system that ultimately became over $250 million in Arizona, because so much of it was sort of built in to how we developed our Medicaid program and how we leveraged local dollars. So I can understand the need for advocacy, and advocacy is incredibly important. But I think there's often times when you are able to successfully build infrastructure into a program, you don't have to do that advocacy annually. Again, over 17 years, I only had to do it once in the greatest recession that the state has ever experienced that impacted the Medicaid program.
And I see you came off mute, so I'll give you the floor.
I'm so glad that you've had that experience, but I think a lot of advocates on the call who have been through really bruising battles the last few years to get and maintain 988 or other crisis services funding know that that's not always the case, and that they've really had to fight, and that it's sometimes pitting crisis services funding against other mental health priorities. And particularly getting that new funding is tough, and then keeping it when things escalate, recession hits, things get worse, when other funding priorities come up. I think we've seen a lot of our advocates really struggle and see that funding get cut.
Yeah, and again, I think part of that is just the strategy to pursue legislation and pursue it down at the legislature versus in those states where you can. Not all states are like this, but in the states where you can, really try to leverage Medicaid flexibilities and other payer sources to do that sort of outside a legislative body that has to, do an actual vote on whether or not they're going to advance dollars. We're sort of stuck on this. I'll be quiet now.
No, well, I'm looking at the time. I see the chat is going, so I welcome you both to stay and add your arguments there. If I could give you about 30 seconds each to highlight your final points, your most hard-hitting points, and Hannah, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I will just say we've seen fees be bipartisan in lots of states, whether that's Colorado, Vermont, Nevada, California. We've seen bipartisan sponsorship and votes for these fees, and we've seen how much money it can bring in. We know far too many people still don't have access to this full continuum of crisis care. And if this funding stream can be leveraged to give that to every person who deserves it, we think that's money you shouldn't leave on the table.
The advocacy is really for a sustainable, broad, growing crisis system. And if 988 fees, telecom fees are part of that, then that should be a state-by-state decision. But there are plenty of states in which that strategy is not a helpful strategy, nor is it going to advance the cause of the ultimate goal of really looking at creating that sustainable, viable, strong system. And there has to be other ways to fund that rather than just a 988 fee. And in many cases, it will not involve a 988 fee. And what we need to focus on is really the ultimate outcome of strong crisis systems, and not just whether or not we got a fee enacted.
All right, thanks, Tom. Well, I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Sims, but before I do, I just want to say this was a very great, robust debate. And again, like many debates that we have within the mental health community, we are all aligned to the same goal. And I think we heard that both from Hannah and Tom. We want sustainable funding. We just have different ideas of getting there, either a fee or alternatives. So let's not let those outside of the mental health community who may want to split us from reaching our goal and let's stay united to make sure that your state has what it needs. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Sims.
Laura, thank you so much for wonderful, wonderful moderation of this panel. This was such an incredible discussion, and I think you can really pick up from the chat box the number of responses that just really open up this discussion. And thank you to Hannah and to Tom for your input, for your leadership, for your guidance in all of this. And hopefully this will help us to be able to move and continue to move forward. So let's go ahead with that. But thank you all again. So we're ready now for our roundtable discussion. And in the roundtable, I promised you that Dr. Michael Hogan was coming back. So Dr. Hogan, if you will, give some brief comments on the debate that just occurred.
Thanks, Brian. That was a great conversation. I view it as a conversation or a dialogue more than a debate. And I'd underline two key points that the presenters made. With Tom, I fundamentally agree that the point of this whole thing is to generate an adequate crisis system. Someone to call, somebody to come, and a place to go. And that's really the fundamental goal here. And then I agree with Hannah that a fee structure, if you can get it, can be a good part of the funding for all of that. And to some extent, after that, it's details. But it's important contextually to note that SAMHSA's appropriation for 988 has gone from like 25 million to 525 million in less than 5 years. And of course, the legislation was approved under Trump 1, and the funding was generated under Biden. And despite the damage that's going on at the federal level, there's no reduction in that proposed funding level in the Trump, whatever it is, budget proposal. So that's a good thing. But also it's critical to note, I don't know what the actual data suggests, but it's critical to note that those resources are going to one leg of the stool, which is call. And it's much more, and our response to calls is better than our capability to respond via mobile crisis. And it's also better than our ability to respond with safe and appropriate places for people to go. So those are the primary areas where we need radical development, and fees are probably not a good strategy, generally speaking, for development of crisis systems overall. So we have to focus on the entire system. Fees can be a good approach, particularly for call, but it doesn't solve the problem of inadequate crisis services in our communities.
Great comprehensive overview, Dr. Hogan. Thank you so much for those comments. We're going to kind of keep you around maybe for a little bit later if we have some time, but thank you for your input and thank you for your initial discussion with us as well. I'm going to move over to our second roundtable discussant, and that is Dr. Brian Hepburn, our CEO at NASHBIT. And Dr. Hepburn, some comments, please.
Thank you, Dr. Sims, and thank you to Mike Hogan. It's always great to hear from Mike. He's somebody that has meant so much to mental health and continues to make great contributions. So thank you, Mike. Also, thank you to Laura and Hannah and Tom. NASHBIT and NAMI and other organizations developed the 988 fees template that states use to develop their legislative bills. So I want to really thank Arlene Stevenson and Hannah for the work that they did in developing the template. I think Hannah makes a very good case for fees to be used to stabilize the funding for 988, and particularly for the call centers. We know that it's hard to fund the call centers with Medicaid dollars. More often it's state general funds. And while I agree with Tom talking about using braided funding, I look at the fees as being part of the braided funding. And over 13 years, I went and testified regularly. And probably like Tom, I was much better at it the last 10 years than I was the first 3 years. And part of the difficulty is that the average commissioner of mental health spends 2 to 2.5 years on the job. So there aren't many people that have the experience that Tom has of going back for 17 years. And I'm sure that Tom was incredibly successful in those, especially those last 10 years, at being persuasive. But individuals that are going and testifying with less experience are not as successful at getting their programs saved. So I would just say, I actually agree with both of them, but I like the idea of having the fees. I think it gives you extra stabilizing in your funding, and does not help when it does not hurt when it goes, when you're going to try to work with braided funding. It gives you additional support, additional stabilization. I enjoyed the discussion. It was very, very well done. So thank you to Hannah and thank you to Tom. Back to you, Brian.
And thanks to you, Dr. Hepburn, as well as Dr. Hogan. Just such a wonderful discussion with regards to the roundtable discussants. And this topic area, as you can see from the chat box, for those of you that are monitoring, still remains a very open issue with discussants. And we want to continue to encourage you, put your thoughts, put your ideas in there, because it's really helpful to all of us. So what we want to do now is go to a post-debate survey that goes in the same line as we did a little earlier, that all states should enact legislation. And now, based on hearing the debate, I'd like to place your answers to the poll right now. Go right ahead. And I think, as before, we will gather these and leave the post-survey debate available for those that are a little late in putting their responses in. But we thank you all, and please, everyone, participate in this. And as we move on now, we're ready for our NASHBID update. And we have the pleasure of having our own Senior Medical and Forensic Advisor and Editor-in-Chief of NASHBID, Dr. Deborah Pinels. And Dr. Pinels, if you'll bring us our NASHBID moment, please.
Hello. Well, what a great debate that was. Got me thinking. So, all right, today we're going to just look a little bit outside our own lens here. And I want to remind people that in 2019, through the support of many of you and SAMHSA and others, we looked beyond the borders, lessons from the international community to improve mental health outcomes and to support improved services and outcomes for people with serious mental illness. So one of the things that we're talking a lot about at NASHBID today are things that are coming back up to our attention and looking beyond the borders at, for example, a place like Trieste, Italy. Next slide. In Trieste, Italy, the history is very interesting. The reliance on asylums or state institutions was taken away when they were all closed. And what that meant was building out a whole continuum of care in a community-based framework that is integrated and with the principles of social recovery, finding purposeful lives for people with serious mental illness, system accountability, and really whole person care that's not defined simply by diagnosis, but really helping people get their support and daily needs met. Next slide. And although maybe Trieste, Italy has the advantage of more cafes and cappuccinos and beautiful ambiance that helps, there are places across the United States with beauty. In fact, every place has beauty. But what really is interesting is this integrated system. And it reminds me of some of the things I learned early on in my training, things we've seen in different smaller communities that we have. Certainly in Western Massachusetts, they have a long history of this since the consent decree that led to the closure, and Mike Hogan will remember this, of Northampton State Hospital. But it's really decreased reliance on institutions and working with people who need care rather than just focusing on dangerousness as an element of care that leads to coercion in care, with interconnected elements and continuity across levels of services, which means if one part of the system has the right amount of staff. It will help the next part of the system. The staff need to be interconnected. The ability to communicate about how an individual is doing at that level of care is key. And communities around the United States are trying to experiment with this a little bit, like Los Angeles and others. And it's very interesting to think about what we can learn. In Ann Arbor, we're doing a project looking at the whole system and bed need using modeling to understand if we have more outpatient services or more crisis services, how many, quote, inpatient beds will we really need? And this is not that inpatient doesn't have a role, it's just keeping it to what is needed to address the population and then providing holistic care. Next slide. So what can we learn from community models that have continuity? I would ask people on this crisis jam to think about that for their own communities. And what models can we build upon in the United States that influence getting the right person in the right place at the right time to help them with their SMI or SED? That may mean treatment at home, of course, that's ideal, or it might mean a crisis type of service or other ways to support people who have needs across the lifespan. So just want you to think about that. Next slide. We're working hard on the 2025 technical assistance papers that we think will help inform the conversation. These are the topics. We urge you to stay abreast of the work that's being done. We love to support you. We love to be here and be part of the conversation. I really appreciate the debate and the dialogue that Crisis Jam always brings. And I think I'll stop there.
Well, Dr. Pinos, thank you so much for that insightful component. We want people to look in the chat box as well, because again, some of the comments that are there are really opening up that discussion to say that it is a needed discussion and it's something that needs to be pulled out more in detail. And last thing I'll leave you with, Dr. Pinos, is that we are so thankful for the services that you provide for NASHBID. But on a personal note, I've been to Trieste and I've now figured out why I felt so comfortable while I was there and so relaxed. But again, thank you for all that you do and appreciate that. And I will agree with Dr. Hogan, you are the best.
Oh, you guys are sweet. All right, my pleasure. Have fun. Bye.
All righty. And we'll go to the Crisis Jam feature here. Just a slide to just show you again some of the parts of the country that have had features done. It's open for anyone. So if yours is still in the black and white, just consider what you might want to highlight and give us some contact. And as we move to the next slide, please, we are ready now for our crisis talk. And we're going to ask Stephanie Hepburn if she'll come forward for today's crisis talk.
Thanks, Dr. Sim. So I'd like to bring Hannah on again. I published this article in 2023, and when I was comparing it, I realized that as of April 2025, 11 states have enacted the 988 service fee, and that's only 6 more than in January 2023. So I wanted to get Hannah's thoughts on what the holdup is there. When I was thinking about our discussion, we talked about language and how important language is, and it was kind of reiterated in the debate, which is using terminology like tax as opposed to a fee. States already have enacted 911 fees that have been long in existence. They are not stagnant. They continue to rise. And that's not really something that's I notice much debate on, yet when it comes to 988, the fees, which are far lower, appear to be a more contentious issue. And one of the things that I researched when we spoke last was the push from telecom and how there's an incentive there to not increase those fees as well. In navigating the language, Hannah, what are you seeing works? What are you seeing that remains to be the pushback?
Yeah, I think a big factor in this is, as was pointed out, we have been very fortunate and successful in advocacy to get more federal funding out to states. And so what we're always hearing from states is like, well, our federal funding is covering it. And so I think that the urgency to move forward on other funding streams has not been as significant because there has been more grants. I think now we are starting to see states, in some cases, panic a little bit. We saw earlier this year that some COVID era money through SAMHSA was rescinded, and we know a lot of that was used for crisis services. So states have to figure out what they are going to do, not knowing if federal money is going to be there. It's certainly our hope that it will be, and we're grateful for strong bipartisan support for 988, but certainly not at the scale of what we had in some of these COVID relief packages that gave those resources to states for really a lot of the startup costs. So that's what we've heard a lot from state leaders, is that they felt like they had enough funding from federal sources. And I don't think that that's a sustainable plan for how you're going to fund this. So yes, only 6 more states, but several more. I mean, we have seen more state appropriations. We have seen other things, and we know that there are some states that are in process now that we're hoping will be successful. But I think that the federal funding has been a significant part of this conversation, and would love to see that continue, but I just don't think that that's necessarily the environment and reality that we're operating in.
Do you feel that stigma continues to be a part of the dialogue when you think about the parity between 911 and 988?
Interesting question. I mean, I think it always is an underlying factor, whether anyone consciously realizes it or not. I think that's a constant pull, and an issue of like, well, it's different, right? It's different. And it is different. We're using a different system. I think what does work well is when people realize, well, we don't always need to send an in-person response. Sometimes we do, but we don't always. And I think really it's comparing with 911 and the emergency response system through 911, but also talking about how it's different. I think that that's important, and helps policymakers understand that these investments are worthwhile because they actually save us money. We're not dispatching EMS or law enforcement to every crisis situation. We're actually de-escalating so many, and that's worth an investment. Whether that's appropriations or a fee, that's worth an investment because it actually is better outcomes and saves us money as a state.
I love that. Thank you so much, Hannah, for hopping on with me. I'll pass it back to you, Dr. Sims.
Well, thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Hannah, for coming back again. I can say to you folks, it has been an incredible ride through this crisis jam today. Such a wonderful debate. I want to give thanks again to our debaters, both Hannah Wesolowski, who was doing the affirmative at the time, and Tom Betlach, because some of the things pointed out, as you could well tell from what individuals have been saying all along, gave good perspectives on both ends. So it gives us a lot to think about moving forward. But it does open up a very much needed discussion. So I'm thankful not only to the two of them, but also our roundtable discussants, Dr. Hogan, again, and Dr. Hepburn, to just give further insights into what's going on. So we want to thank all of you for being a part of today's jam. We want to thank Laura for her wonderful moderation of the panel, and all the participants who have made this crisis jam today an element that is still working in a very powerfully positive manner. If we'll go with the next slide. Just a reminder, coming up next week, excited about this. Are you ready for Advanced Systems for Crisis Care with our own Monica Johnson, who's going to be presenting? And haven't seen Monica in a while. It'll be wonderful to see her come back again, because she is such a dynamic individual. And with that, folks, we have reached the end of today's Crisis Jam. I want to thank everyone who has participated. I want to thank you all for being a part of the jam, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Have a